of the votes, and no one seems to, agree with him on that. And I had read somewhere, I can't remember where though, that some of the polls showed exactly that Serge Sarkisian was getting around a little bit over the 50%, and Ted Petrosian was getting around 20%, which is what the election showed. And if you could talk about how does Armenia compare with Georgia and Azerbaijan's democracy, because I know in Georgia there were protests in November of '07 where over 500 people got injured too, and do they have a commission to investigate that violence?
For the first part of the question, I would like to refer to my colleague, David Gregorian, because he was more involved, more so than anyone else in that aspect. Just briefly about the second part. Armenia's, again, this is one of the things about national pride in the region, which one scores better in terms of which is more democracy, and like there's this kind of a sibling rivalry that you can see in the relations are nothing but sibling, but in general, about we score better, we are better democracy and so on. I think, unlike Georgia and Azerbaijan, Armenia's development in terms of democracy was consistently better, becoming better. I'm not saying that it's better than the other one, but there was always a growing amount of development in terms of more respect and more free and less fraudulent elections until this last election. Georgia had more of a rapid change. The 2003 elections, which actually resulted in the Rose Revolution. After that, there were significant developments, but then again decreased up until the last election in Georgia, where the President Saakashvili called for a snap election, mostly because there were a lot of demonstrations. Azerbaijan is completely, I think, problematic in terms of it doesn't even register on the spectrum. Very, very difficult in terms of the reports that Amnesty International has, and mostly about Amnesty International in terms of people having rights, voting rights. The state institutions are very strong in terms of isolating any kind of a political dissent. But I don't think we need to look at that in terms of development. I think that one of the indicators, it's not about the election, I think the best indicator is looking to what extent you have a popular civil society movement, because these are the watchdogs, these are the major aspects of making sure that elections are respected or there are no violations. And at the end of the day, as was mentioned by Professor Kojam, and the delegation visiting there is interest by the population. As long as people there, be that in Georgia or Azerbaijan or Armenia, they don't take ownership, people there, no matter what you do here, even if you're an Armenian, no matter what you do here, you're not going to make any impact on it. You need to, one of the things we need to look at is how can you create an environment which allows people there, civil society, young people, women's groups and so on, to take the streets and demand accountability. Rather than we can sit here and say as much as we want and talk about it as much as we want. The State Department can come up with statements, but that's not going to change anything. So I think our indicators have to also be, we have to be very careful in choosing our indicators, which country is better. And although I would say that elections in Armenia were the worst and actually turned the country's image and so on, in a way I look at it positive because it showed to what extent there is a sense of ownership in the country by the younger people, by the civil society.
Do you want to answer on the polling?
Sure. There were a couple of attempts to do exit polling, but nobody believed their credibility. But going back to, and then of course statistically the sampling issues and all of that were questionable. More importantly, what the results, what our results found or showed based on official, and I want to emphasize this point, based on official statistics, is that none of the candidates made the 50% threshold. So I don't care who claims what. Ted Petrosian or Serge Sarkisian, numbers clearly show that no one made the 50% margin.
Let me now take several questions in a row. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. My name is Brian Murphy. I was chief of party of the Law Reform Project some years ago and based in Yerevan. For Professor Kojam, I was very concerned, one, about the reported the 10 persons killed, but there's 70 persons who are still in prison. I wonder if you could address the likelihood of the international community addressing that in some effective way. Thank you.
Yeah, Mark Duffy here from GW. I do ethnological work in Armenia, and I wanted to kind of take Hope's remark in a different direction and ask, where was Russia during these elections? What was Russia's interest and desire here? Because it probably most likely did have something to say about all this.
Taken, yes?
I'm Brian Beard from Congressional Quarterly. I believe it's for Professor Kuchichkin. It's more about the war and the impact that that's had on other separatist conflicts in the region. What in Chechnya, Dagestan, Nagorno-Karabakh, Abkhazia, what do they feel now, given what they've seen in August? Do they feel more afraid of Russia bearing down on them, or do they also feel in some way emboldened in that Russia has encouraged one separatist movement and therefore, the Pandora's box could be open?
Okay, let's go with these. And Professor Kuchikian, let you answer first.
By the way, I completely agree with Paul in terms of the way she presented about the presence of the West, and it was just, I guess, I like to play that extreme thing, but I think to a large extent it's not as much as our presence. I was there actually. I was in Armenia and Georgia on U.S. funds when I was doing my research, the State Department and so on. So there's clearly an interest, and there's clearly an attempt to fill a vacuum, which we feel, and understand a region which up until recently was part of the evil empire behind the curtain, Iron Curtain, and so on. That being said, I think the fact that these countries have shared over 70 years of a common political culture, have a similar outlook on things, makes them closer, makes them easier to understand. The Russians makes them easier to manipulate and understand the situation, which is something that we in the West might have trouble in terms of infiltrating, in terms of having more influential or long-term impact on it. In this case, by the way, I always think and believe that the EU or European countries have yield better results, mostly because of the fact that geographically they're closer, historically they have been closer, and they try to include Russia. They don't have the superpower sort of approach of things. In terms of what Russia's thinking and the way they're looking, I think to a large extent, in the case of Armenia, I don't think they were very much heavily involved in it. They didn't think that anyone would make a difference. Of course, better the devil you know kind of an approach. Serge Sarkisian was tested. He was pro-Russian, at least in rhetoric and in terms of action in the last 4 or 5 years. But at the same time, the fact that Petrosyan was basically switching sides, if you want to put it roughly, and not becoming an advocate of the West to more pro-Russian or at least not anti-Russian approach. I think that made Russians more saying that, you settle this on your own. But I don't think they would have any kind of an influence. I don't think there was a significant foreign influence on the election, be that from Russia or from the West. Whatever they claim, whatever the Serge Sarkisian claimed that this was a colorful revolution in the making, or some people would argue, this was Russia's choice in supporting Serge Sarkisian. I don't think that's true. In terms of the question about